Let's jump right into this epic explainer. We're going to condense over 1,200 years of absolutely chaotic Roman history into one cohesive journey. We're covering the whole shebang, from the mythological birth of a tiny, scrappy settlement, all the way to the colossal collapse of an empire that literally ruled 10% of humanity. So, how exactly did a mythological sibling rivalry turn into the greatest, most chaotic empire in human history? Keep that question in the back of your mind as we trace Rome's wild evolution. It's an unbelievable story, right? Full of incredible architectural and military achievements, sure, but also profound dysfunction, betrayal, and just massive egos. Here's our roadmap. We're tracking Rome's rise and fall across 6 distinct eras: myth, murder, and early kings, the Republic's villain arc, Caesar and the New Empire, Augustus and the Golden Age, chaos and Praetorian rule, and finally, the fall of the West. All right, errand number 1, myth, murder, and early kings.
Our story kicks off in 771 BC, in Alba Longa, an ancient city near what we now know as Rome. A virgin priestess named Sylvia supposedly gave birth to twins. But according to the myth, these weren't just any regular babies. They were actually fathered by the god of war himself, Mars. The king at the time ordered them thrown into a river, but get this, they survived and were raised by a wolf. When these twins, Romulus and Remus, grew up and decided to build their own city, they got into a ridiculous argument over who could spot the most birds. That argument escalated until Romulus literally murdered his brother. Yep, Rome was founded on a bird-counting dispute. Romulus became the first of 7 kings, and he actually turned Rome into an asylum city for runaways and criminals just to boost the population. Eventually, the Romans had enough. After booting out their 7th incredibly cruel king, they established a strict new rule: no more kings, ever. They set up a republic ruled by 2 consuls to make sure no single guy could ever hold all the power again. These consuls ruled at the exact same time, they could veto each other, and they were swapped out every single year. The absolute rule of kings was supposedly gone for good.
Moving on to Era 2, the Republic's villain arc. What's incredibly fascinating about this era is how a massive, embarrassing humiliation basically forced Rome to become an ultra-militaristic society. See, the Gauls swept in, sacked, and burned most of Rome, and basically treated the city like a weekend camping trip. It was deeply traumatic. Rome only survived by paying a hefty ransom in solid gold. Honestly, this was their villain origin story. They vowed right then and there to aggressively conquer anything that wasn't nailed down so they would never, ever be that vulnerable again. That aggressive expansion put them on a collision course with Carthage, leading to the Punic Wars. The final score? Rome 3, Carthage 0. Despite facing legendary generals like Hannibal, and yes, his 37 war elephants, Rome ultimately deleted their only real rival from the timeline. Over 3 massive, blockbuster conflicts, Rome literally reverse-engineered stolen Carthaginian ship designs to build our own navy. They survived Hannibal marching a massive army over the Alps, and in the end, they enslaved the entire surviving population of Carthage. And with Carthage out of the picture, Rome just became completely addicted to expansion. Which brings us to Era 3, Caesar and the New Empire. By conquering 10% of humanity, Rome set the stage for the final boss of the Republic, Julius Caesar. This guy dismantled Gaul, flirted with invading Germany, and casually invaded Britain, returning home with so much power it absolutely terrified the Senate. But here's the thing. Despite collecting political titles like they were trading cards, Caesar wasn't just some tyrant. The general public actually loved him. He pushed through these highly effective reforms. He fixed the chaotic calendar, giving us the 365-day year. He lowered taxes, forgave debts, regulated the free grain supply so the poor wouldn't starve, and even gave land to his war veterans. So, the crucial point here is that the paranoid Senate made a fatal miscalculation. By stabbing Caesar 23 times, they sparked the exact civil wars they were trying to avoid. The senators genuinely thought they were saving the Republic from a king, but they completely misread the room. The public adored Caesar. So instead of saving the state, that assassination plunged Rome into a massive, incredibly bloody civil war. And that leads into Era 4, Augustus and the Golden Age. Out of the ashes of all that bloodshed, Caesar's adopted heir, Octavian, now going by Augustus, officially birthed the empire in 27 BC. He took total control and eliminated rivals like Mark Antony. Augustus was smart. He knew the Republic failed because soldiers were fiercely loyal to rogue generals who promised them land and loot. So he masterfully shifted that loyalty upward.
He turned the imperial army into a professional standing force loyal to the state. Now the government, not some individual rogue general, guaranteed their standardized pay and their retirement.
It was a real game changer. By prioritizing stability over just blind conquest, Augustus created a centralized, predictable system that kicked off Rome's golden age. He abandoned endless expansion and instead hardened frontiers like the Danube. He stationed around 150,000 permanent professional legions across the empire and focused on building massive infrastructure. We're talking an incredible era of paved roads, aqueducts, and booming trade.
Next up, Era 5, Chaos and Praetorian Rule. How did a Roman general fumble so badly? Well, this beautifully structured golden age eventually started rotting from the inside out, beginning with a catastrophic misjudgment of the people living just outside those hardened borders. In 9 AD, a trusted Germanic ally named Arminius totally exploited Rome's assumption of superiority. See, Arminius understood Roman warfare perfectly because he'd actually trained with them. He knew Rome's biggest blind spot was assuming everyone secretly wanted to be Roman. So he lured General Varus and 20,000 professional Roman soldiers deep into the dense, muddy Teutoburg forest. The Romans couldn't get into their famous formations, and they were completely wiped out. It permanently ended Rome's ambitions to conquer Germania.
Meanwhile, back in the capital, things were getting wild. Power stopped flowing through actual institutions and started flowing directly through the Praetorian Guard. Originally, Augustus created them as an elite protective unit, but by 37 AD, they realized that if they controlled access to the emperor, they controlled Rome itself. They started murdering leaders like Caligula, orchestrated the infamous Year of the Four Emperors in 69 AD, and by 193 AD, they literally auctioned off the title of emperor to the highest bidder. Legitimacy totally vanished. If you had the strongest army backing you, congratulations, you were emperor, regardless of whether you could actually lead. All this 3rd century chaos, we're talking plagues, hyperinflation, and practically weekly assassinations, forced a radical restructure. The empire was just way too big and unstable to manage from one central spot. Enter the Tetrarchy, or the Rule of Four. They literally chopped the massive empire into 4 manageable pieces to keep the generals closer to the borders and the action. This massive shift pushed power to the edges and left the actual city of Rome practically abandoned. Which brings us to our final era, the fall of the West. Here's where the fracture becomes permanent. Emperor Constantine saw that the future was clearly in the east, so he built the incredibly wealthy, highly defensible Christian city of Constantinople, right at the choke point between Europe and Asia. But this move totally drained the Latin Western Empire of its wealth and its intellectual elite. So while the Greek-speaking Byzantine Empire in the east flourished, the Latin-speaking West was left behind, weak, and increasingly ruled by foreign kings. It essentially became a hollowed-out ghost province. The cyclical fall of the West wasn't just one event. It was a domino effect, triggered by uncontrolled mass migration. When the terrifying Huns swept into Europe, tens of thousands of Goths were pushed inward, fleeing to the Roman border to seek asylum. Rome actually let them in, but deeply corrupt Roman officials completely exploited and starved them. Left with literally no other choice, the Goths revolted. They destroyed a Roman army, sacked Rome, and even killed an emperor on the battlefield. Corrupt integration policies essentially turned desperate asylum seekers into a massive internal rebel army. The Western Empire entered a total death spiral. Their new foreign policy essentially became, here's land, please stop burning us. They desperately tried to survive by making land deals with armed groups like the Vandals and Visigoths simply because they couldn't defeat them militarily anymore. They lost North Africa to the Vandals, which meant losing their grain supply and their tax money. And without taxes, you have no soldiers. The Visigoths even sacked the city of Rome itself in 410 AD, practically just because they could. And so there was no epic, fiery final battle. The Western Roman Empire quietly died in 476 AD from what we can only call emperor fatigue. A Germanic commander essentially just politely asked the last emperor to step down. And in a twist of unbelievable historical irony, that last emperor's name was Romulus August Julius, carrying the names of both the city's founder and its very first emperor. He simply retired to a villa, and the Western Empire was officially dead from sheer exhaustion. But did Rome really fall, or did it survive as the Byzantine Empire for another 1,000 years? See, while the West crumbled into history, the wealthy eastern half fought on all the way until 1453. Modern historians call it the Byzantine Empire, but they called themselves Romans. They survived for a staggering 1,000 additional years. So I leave you with this provocative thought to ponder. Did the Roman Empire truly fall in 476, or did it just change its mailing address and keep right on ruling for another millennium?